Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. I want to thank Susie for inviting me or selecting my talk. It's been a long time since I've been here. It's an honor to actually be here. I actually want to introduce myself just a little bit. I don't really know anyone in this room except for just a couple of people. My name is Pat Guariglia. I'm from the United States. I live in New York. I've been an Agile coach and a trainer, a startup coach, a leadership coach, a founder. For the last 13 years, I've actually been focusing on Agile coaching. I started my company called Elegant Agile. That's what I've been doing for the last 13 years. I've worked with probably close to 50 different companies in the time period that I'm talking about. Trained almost 4,000 people, which is insane for me to think about, but I did the math, and that's about right. I look at that slide, and I'm pretty proud of that career, actually. It's taken me a long road, but I'm really happy with what I've done. But that's just a LinkedIn Pat. That's the Pat that everyone knows publicly. I actually want to talk about something else. There's a whole different side of me. And that different side of me is the part that actually brought me here today. It's the part that I discovered about myself that brings me to this stage. So I'm going to tell you a story. My career was anything but a straight line. And there's a lot of people that they grow up and they're like, I'm going to do that thing, and in 20 years, that's what I'm going to be doing. That wasn't me. I went to college. I was going to be in the intelligence field. I went to school for foreign service. My father was an arts and antiques gallery owner, so I understood that life growing up. I learned entrepreneurship from him. When I went to school, as I was graduating from university, towards the end of my school, I started to think, maybe I want to take some time off. Maybe I don't want to get my master's right away. And coincidentally, my dad came up to me and said, hey, do you want to be a partner in an arts and antiques auction house? I said, geez, yeah, that seems about right. Why not? I'll do that. And for 3 years, that's what I did. I learned how to run small teams. I had 20, 24 people within that organization. It was pretty exciting. I met a lot of really interesting people. I had hundreds of sellers and hundreds of customers, and most of those people were fabulous people to deal with, and a few were the things that actual nightmares are made of. That was exciting, but it burned me out. And after 3 years, I decided, you know what, I'm done. I resigned my partnership. I was broke, no money, burned out. My best friend came to me. He said, Pat, this is around 2000. Pat, why don't we start a web development business? Let's start building websites. I was like, sure, I don't know anything about that, but I can try. So we started building websites for car dealerships in the area that I live in. It was pretty cool, actually. We had this really cool little product where we can do 360-degree virtual interiors of cars and outside. This is in 2000, so that was kind of cutting edge at the time. But after about a year and a half, it sucked. I didn't have any money, broke again. So I said, all right, I got to get a job, like a real job. Shit. All right. So I applied to General Electric, GE, Schenectady, New York, the birthplace of GE. So I got a job as a project manager there. I worked there for a few years. I learned how to manage projects. I actually learned discipline. I had no discipline in my life. I learned about Lean, Six Sigma. That was pretty good. But I looked around, and I saw people that were there for decades. In fact, I shared a cubicle with somebody that was there for almost 30 years, and I was in my mid-20s. I thought, that's not me. I can't do this. This is not who I am. So I quit. My good friend again, now he's a doctor, came over to me and said, hey, Pat, what about a VR, virtual reality, telemedicine business? I said, sure, I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to try that too. So we actually built this platform. This was the mid-2000s. Telemedicine at that time was a zero. Didn't really exist. This was kind of cutting edge. So we used streaming video over the internet, built this platform that integrated with medical records. We pitched it to hospitals. We raised investment funds. I did that for a couple years. Guess where that landed me? Nowhere, right? So no one really adopted. It was way too early. Again, I was kind of in a serious situation financially. I decided, you know what? I got to get another job. Back to that again. So I applied to be a project manager at the Department of Transportation in New York State. That's where Agile entered my life. In fact, at that job, I introduced Agile and Scrum to New York State government. And I did that for about 4 years. I was a Scrum Master. I didn't really know what I was doing too much, but I learned along the way. And I got some attention from the state. I got to speak at a couple of conferences because of that. In fact, I came here 10 or 11 years ago to talk about that, which is really why I'm here today. So what's going on here? So in 4 years, I left DOT. I said, you know what? I'm going to start my own Agile coaching company, Elegant Agile. That's what you saw on the slide. That's where all that comes from. That's okay. It's supposed to be. So over the last 13 years, I've been this coach. But even as I was a coach, all that stuff that you saw on the slide, I actually had my mind someplace else. I was always looking for new opportunities. During that time, I started 5 more businesses. 3 of those businesses failed. I really wasn't great at that. And as I think about it, I look back at myself and I think, geez, I wasn't really 100% in on being a coach. I always kind of had my mind elsewhere. I guess this thing isn't working. And over the last 13 years, with all the businesses I ran and all the coaching that I thought I was doing, I made a ton of mistakes, many, many mistakes. But, I look back at that, and at the time, I wore those mistakes proudly. Like, these were things that defined me. And I used those mistakes as learning opportunities for the next thing I wanted to do. And in many ways, this is the Agile mindset. I kept iterating on myself and trying to make myself better. It is the 12th principle of the Agile Manifesto. But because I had my mind somewhere else, I wasn't really a good coach. I wasn't a good coach for a long time. I only got into coaching in 2010 because I knew a little bit more than the next guy. Right, so I left my job, I started this company. I got hired because I knew a little bit more about Agile, a little bit more about Scrum than the people who needed me. So I went there, I did that work, and over time, I grew in that job. And I became really good at articulating things, explaining what Scrum is, explaining what Agile is. But I look back at that, and I think, that was a mechanical person. I just repeated things that I heard. I didn't really know a lot. And I actually became overly confident in myself because of that. I came back here in 2013 to talk about what is Scrum? What's all this stuff about Scrum? Right on the stage. And there I am, looking overly confident with my head down. That's me right here. But, I look back at that time in my life, and I think, I just wasn't a coach. I was actually a consultant with Agile expertise. That's all I was. I wasn't a good listener. I guided people too much. I prescribed paths too much. I told people what to do, and I showed them how to do it, and then I gave them tips on how to do it more like me. That's all I was. I was a consultant. And as I grew and I failed, and I succeeded at things, I started to realize that I might not know everything. And in fact, today, standing up here, I'm pretty sure I don't know a whole lot. I started to recognize that part of my personality was that I was actually not a listener. And I think because of my confidence, and I had a little success in what I thought was coaching, I had an ego, and an ego that grew. And I didn't actually give people the space that they needed to talk. I was the talker. That wasn't good. I'll tell you a quick story about this, where it really hit home for me. I was a coach in the Netherlands for a bunch of teams. This is about 2015. And I remember one of the teams, the Scrum Master came to me right after lunch, privately, and she said, "Pat, we need space from you. You're not letting us talk. You're being a little bit too strong with your approach." I was like, oh my God. That was embarrassment. that conversation, actually it wasn't a conversation because she was just talking to me. I said, okay, no problem. And I walked away from that. I was like, man, that was embarrassing. And then I thought, what's wrong with them? What am I doing? If you look at my career as a coach, and I look back at that and I think of the 4 stages of competence, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, I think right now, where I actually am, is right around that blue arrow, going up. But when I look back, I probably thought I was at the top right box, but I really wasn't. The 4 stages of competence are pretty cool. We have unconscious incompetence to start with. This is the ignorance stage. This is really where you just don't really know what you don't know. You might have the wrong impression about it. Then you move down, hopefully, into the conscious incompetence stage. This is where you have your awareness that you don't know, and you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to explore your options, and you move over to the conscious competence stage, the learner. This is where we actively pursue our interests. We try to do that work. We do the hard work of doing it. It's not automatic yet. That's where mastery comes in. The top one, top right, unconscious competence. Mastery, it's where you do things automatically. It's like walking, or if you ride a bike, getting on your bike and riding. I think of also, in a music sense, I think about playing the guitar and singing. I play the guitar, I'm pretty good at that, but when I try to do both guitar and singing, I'm not quite at that mastery level. I have to actually think about it. So I'm down here. That's coincidentally where I feel like I probably am as an actual coach. So why am I telling you this? What relevance does this actually have on our conference? Here's the thing. This is a story. It's a story of me. It's a story that leads to a discovery for me. And that discovery is actually what brought me here. And part of my story is that I started to understand myself better. Unfortunately, I didn't understand myself better because there was some glorious moment where sunlight came down on my face and said, Pat, this is the path for you. No, it didn't work that way for me, actually. It was more painful than that. I started this journey because there was pain in my personal life. This affected me, my ego, my lifestyle that I was living. I had a lot going on. It started to bleed into my personal life as well, my friendships, my relationships. And it was time then for me to start looking at myself. What was I doing? And look at really who I was. Another thing I figured out around the same time is that there's something about risk in my nature. This is all going someplace, by the way. I understood that not everyone is a risk taker like I am. I take risks. I see that about myself. I start all these dumb businesses, and they're calculated risks, but I do take risks. And when I look at those who I coach, I look at them from a risk standpoint. Not everyone is a risk taker, but there are a few people who are risk takers. And those risk takers sometimes are the people who help us with these transformations. They're willing to jump on board a little bit. So I kind of latch on to them. I learned how to rock climb, really rappel actually, rappelling where you hook into a rope and you scale down a cliff, when I was 23 years old. I learned by myself. The same friend who's a doctor, he also liked to rappel, but he was done with that. He gave me his climbing harness, and he gave me a couple of tips on how to hook into the harness. And I thought, I can do this. So I got a book on the topic, and I read a little bit about it, and I found a tree in my yard with a slight little slope in front of it, tied the rope around the tree, hooked myself into the harness, and I said, yeah, I can figure this out. This is how it works. So I went out and bought a 150-foot-long rope. Then I found the biggest cliff I could find in my area. I went there. This cliff was 100 feet. I tied a rope around the tree, dropped the rope over the edge, and it was 100 feet or so because when I looked down where the rope had landed, there was just a little bit left. I clicked into the rope, started to ease myself back into the position of being at the edge of the cliff, and I looked down, and all of the fear in my life entered my body right at that moment. And at the same time, All of the excitement and adrenaline you could ever imagine entered my body at the same time. And I looked down, I just went over it. That's not a story of bravery. That's a calculated risk. I tested things out just enough. It's also a story of stupidity. And not everyone is like this. I recognize that. But when I was early into coaching, I used to think, why don't you just take a chance? Why don't you take a chance in me? Why don't you take a chance with Agile? It seems so obvious to me. Just be a risk taker. I actually wasn't putting myself in their shoes. I chose not to look at it from their point of view. I have a curious mind. I'm a risk taker by nature. I like new opportunities, and that set me up to be an Agile coach. But as I grew more confident, I actually grew more complacent, and I stopped listening. I started predicting. Oh, you see this situation here with this leadership, this is what they're going to do. You see this team, I know exactly what they're going to be thinking right here. Mostly I was right, actually, but there were plenty of times where I was wrong. But I didn't see those wrong times as something that I should have learned about. I just thought they were outliers. As I matured in my personal life, I became more challenged with my own lifestyle, I started to have to change. I started to become more introspective. I started to listen more. I had to. As I moved personally into that conscious competence stage, what I would say the learner, that third step, I actually naturally became more curious. Always be curious. If you're not curious, you're not learning. Coaches and Scrum Masters, you must be curious. That's how you get to ask good questions. Something else happened to me to help me better understand myself, the type of personality that I have. One day, during the early stages of me being in that learning period, my wife gave me a book. This is in 2017. She handed me this book, and she said to me in these words, if you want to understand me better, if you want to know more who I am, then you should read this book. I was like, wow. I had been with my wife for quite a while at this point. And so she gave me this book. I took it pretty seriously. And there's a joke in my family that I'm not a reader of actual physical books. And that's true. I like to listen to books. And this was a physical book, so I had to actually turn the pages and read. So I did. That book actually changed it all for me. Not only did it change my understanding of my wife, changed my understanding of myself a bit. I started to look at the world around me and people who I'm coaching, the teams that I'm working with, and I started wondering, could this affect the teams? Could it affect organizational thinking? The book is quiet. The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. I can never get the title right. Now, my wife is absolutely an introvert, and I'm not so much. I'm actually what's called an ambivert, somewhere in between. And I took the Myers-Briggs evaluation, and I found that out about myself. I had no idea. So what did I learn about this book? Well, in this book, she obviously talks about these different personality types, introverts, extroverts, ambiverts. And she focuses a lot on how introverts work and live and exist in a world that's really focused on extroverted behavior. And we idolize extroverts in our pop culture, in business, in our leadership. Our culture actually orients itself towards this extroverted way of being. This was really opening up my eyes a lot. It probably makes sense just to talk about what these personality types are in case you're not 100% sure of what I'm referring to. So an introvert is a person who's typically quiet, they're reserved, they're introspective, they actually enjoy alone time. This is how they recharge themselves. They actually need the alone time to reground themselves. And an extrovert is kind of on the polar opposite side of that. This is an unreserved person, outgoing, they're gregarious, they like social interaction, and that's what gives them energy. And an ambivert, as you may have guessed already, is somebody who fits both of these. They're kind of in between. They have both of these traits at different times. After reading this book, I found out that introverts can act like extroverts. What? I didn't know that. Extroverts can act like introverts. And under the right setting, topic, and people, introverts can come out and be extremely social and gregarious and outgoing. And conversely, under the wrong setting, topic, and people, extroverts will withdraw and disappear. And as an ambivert, I find myself in these two worlds. And when I say these things out loud to you all, right in front of me, it's so obvious to me now. But back then, it was not, and my mind was blown. I started doing more research on this topic. I was like, what is going on here? I started looking at everything from this perspective, especially the work I was doing. I started to look at coaching this way. Is this affecting teams? Is this actually having any impact on teams? How does it affect Agile? How does this affect transformations? Is there some sort of resistance between personality types and what we interpret Agile in? Is there some kind of friction in these personality types, in the world that we live in our community of Agile and within teams? And I think the answers to those questions is yes. I actually do. According to USA Today, there was a poll. 65% of leaders and executives across all industries look at introversion as a barrier to growth. Soak that in for a moment. 65% of leaders think that introversion is a barrier to growth. This is why in US business schools like at Harvard and Wharton, a lot of what you're evaluated on is how engaging you are and how well you speak. Adam Grant, who is a popular podcaster and writer in the United States, I'm not sure if he's popular anywhere else, honestly, he did a study at Wharton, and this study showed that 96% of those interviewed at the leadership level viewed themselves as extroverts. That is a very interesting piece of information. If we have a leadership pool that is mostly extroverts, how does that affect how they lead? How does that affect how they interpret Agile? Let's actually look at the breakdown of personality types in the general population for a moment. Now, this is not an exact science by any means. This data is collected through various polls, surveys, evaluations, studies. The general population, about 25% of us, are introverts, meaning they need that quiet time, the alone time to recharge. And another 25% or so, they enjoy that social interaction, very outgoing. And about 50% of us, which is about half of this room, are ambiverts, meaning they are really both. If we look at this as our general baseline for what I'm about to compare things to, we're going to see something kind of interesting. We're going to look at now our world, the tech space. We have on the left-hand side the general population, 25%. Software engineers, now software engineering is a broad category. 60 to 65% are on the introvert side. Now, some of you are chuckling and so forth. It's because we probably sense this, right? Now let's look at the other side of this. General population, 25% extroverts. When you look at our leadership pool, which there are probably a bunch of you in this room, 96% of the leaderships identify as an extrovert. So how does this apply to Agile? Think about it for a moment. This is who we are. This is our space. This is our community. This was a reality check for me. We may have a conflict. When the majority of our leadership are on the extroverted side, and the majority of our team members are potentially on the introverted side, is it possible we're going to get this resistance, some kind of friction in there, on perception of value, on what's important, how we perceive things, principles even, especially when it comes to Agile? When you look at the root of all of Agile, why we're here today, well, we can go back to Lean, of course, and Not too long ago, there was this thing called the Agile Manifesto, which I'm sure we all know by heart. This thing that I absolutely love. These 5 principles here, the ones on the slide, these are the ones that stand out to me a little bit more when I look at it through this lens. These principles have a lot to do with transparency, open communication, teamwork, face-to-face conversations. You know where I'm going with this. Extroverted leadership might look at this set of 5 principles and go, yeah, give me more of that. In fact, give it for everyone. And the team members, who may not be extroverted, might look at this and say, really? We're doing this now? I don't think so. So what do we do about this? If we recognize that we look at things differently, how can we actually do things differently? Agile, the success of Agile depends so much on how we collaborate and work together. Collaboration and working together is how beautiful products get made. But they also get made through alone time, deep in our thoughts, deep in our minds. We have to have that. Extroverts might not be wired to think that way, but introverts may actually be wired to think that way. And between the two, there may be a natural aversion to one or the other. And this natural aversion actually may conflict with how we think about social behavior in Agile and within our teams and how we move towards Agile. Think about open floor plans for a moment. All of our team activities are done here. Our stand-up meetings, or our impromptu meetings. Now look at it through this new perspective for just a moment. Free and open communication looks a little bit different sometimes. That's a different perspective. Open floor plans aren't unique to Agile, but they of course are commonly found. We just heard about one. If you're a part of the 65%, 60 to 65% of our team population who needs alone time, then this might not be the most comfortable place to work. I'm not saying get rid of it. There are different ways to look at it though. If you're part of the leadership crowd, this is your scene right here. This works for you. Total transparency. I can see everything. It's great. Virtual teams, we don't, it's the same thing. Look how happy I look. I tried to pick a realistic one, and I didn't have any problem with that. I was like, oh my God, there's so many that are just like this. So virtual teams, it's the same thing. Extroverts want more interaction. We have back-to-back meetings. Get on camera. Let's meet all the time. And introverts might not feel so much. This is an actual coaching, what I thought was coaching session. And look at that, I'm the only one on camera. I don't know what's going on with Seda over there, but we get it. The reality is that there are introverts, extroverts, and ambiverts inside and outside of our teams. If we try to have a little bit more of a thoughtful approach about how we consider them, we might actually be able to cultivate Agile differently to accommodate the different personality types. By raising awareness, which is actually what I'm trying to do, telling you my story, getting to this point, I'm actually challenging you to think differently about it. And by using the statistics, the traits, the characteristics of the environments that our teams operate in, maybe you'll look at things a little bit differently in our physical and virtual worlds. It's interesting because the balance of introverts and extroverts throughout the world is actually a little bit different. It's not all the same. Those slides on the general population is kind of a blended average of the worldwide population. That means that within our teams, from different cultural perspectives, we see and value things differently. Of course, we all know that inherently. But let's just take a look at the world through our introvert-extrovert lens for a moment. According to NERIS, which is where I got a lot of this data from on the personality types, they collected data from almost 40 million people. Could you imagine that? 40 million people over 3 to 5 years. And so what we're looking at on this slide is actually how much above or below certain averages there are in the world. In Europe, and even where we are right here, there tends to be a higher than average number of introverts in the general population. And when you look at this part of the world, there tends to be a higher than average number of extroverts in the general population, especially when you look at India, Pakistan, and especially Lebanon. The world's different. In Western culture, if I can call it that, we already know we place a lot of emphasis and attention on extrovert-like behavior. You think of the movie stars, action heroes. Our society kind of tends to idolize the rock stars, the pop stars, the rappers, the athletes who put themselves out there with huge risks and with these big personalities. And this is probably why 65% of American and European leaders look at introversion as a barrier to growth, because this is what we idolize. In most Western cultures, especially where I live in the United States, success is based on how well you can speak and how you can get yourself out there. And that exists from the moment you're a little kid going to school all the way through to where we are right here in business, in life, in our jobs. That's how we are looked at for the most part. Meanwhile, in other places of the world, parts of Eastern Europe here, Scandinavia, places in Asia and Africa, extroverted behavior isn't really looked at that way. It's more on the introverted side. They look towards that. I guess it's okay. When you look at the highly extroverted leadership, it might be very logical to think that they would be better able to relate to those values and principles of close collaboration, face-to-face communication, and open communication within the teams. And they may even reward certain people who speak louder with leadership positions over those who are more quiet. When those who are quiet and are not heard, then we're missing opportunities. We're missing a lot. I want you to think about retrospectives for a moment. Just change the topic just slightly. We've all been to them. What have you seen in retrospectives? Now, as a coach, last 13 or so years, I've seen a lot. And for the most part, when I'm kind of entering a new team and I look at this team and I'm observing, almost always, 2 or 3 of the people in that team are more vocal, and the other 6 or 7 or so are quiet. And I look at the statistics, that 60 to 65% are probably introverts. Well, that checks out. When we're not hearing from everyone in the team, we're not growing evenly. When the louder people are the ones providing the improvements, everyone votes on those improvements, the team, after time of a retrospective, starts to become a reflection of the louder individuals. And the quieter ones are not actually vocalizing enough or getting themselves heard enough. So we're not getting a balanced approach. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. Introverts are actually some of the best thinkers and leaders in the world. It's actually a fallacy to think that they couldn't be great thinkers or innovators or leaders. Gandhi, Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, amazing people, amazing thinkers, leaders, innovators. There could have been hundreds more that I could have put on this slide, but you wouldn't see their faces. Guess what? They're all introverts. They're introverts acting like extroverts because it's the right setting, the right topic, the right people. They're comfortable in this setting. Einstein was quoted, the monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind. What an introverted thing to say. If our culture really favors extroverted behavior, it makes sense that our business culture would be doing the same. If our culture idolizes glamour, fame, and open communication to extroverts, then we are missing these opportunities from introverts. We're also ignoring the needs of them. Agile isn't necessarily promoting extroverted-like behavior, but it's also not putting it away either. That's on us. We have to figure that out. Our open floor plans, and our emphasis on face-to-face communication is all very good. I actually firmly believe in all of that. But initially, when we introduce this, it really only creates a warm environment for extroverts to thrive in. We actually need to consider introverts in our teams and our organizations. Given time alone, introverts will build skills thoroughly. They'll do the research. They'll develop ideas. They'll analyze things, assess things, think things through. But they need that alone time. They need the alone time to recharge and regroup and reground themselves. If we're constantly in meetings, this is not going to happen. It absolutely will never happen. And we'll lose opportunities. People will check out. But give them quiet time, and you're going to see something amazing. Once you do that, protect it, preserve it, keep it there. Just a few small changes in our day-to-day might actually better accommodate how people work and the diversity of our personality types. And if it's done, it might actually make people happier, healthier, and when they're happier and healthier, they're going to build beautiful products. And when we're building beautiful products, it's a win-win for everyone. So there's just a few small things I want to recommend. And leadership, you play a big part in this. Your awareness, your sensitivity, that should allow you to open your eyes a little bit differently, like I had my eyes opened up. I always say, start with a vision. Start with your why on this. Your vision, this is how we lead. That's the why. The vision tells us why we are here, why we are working together. If we have a really strong vision, that's like a giant magnet that pulls everything towards it. Self-organization happens because, in part, of a strong why. And once we have that strong why, leave them alone. The teams will actually figure out how to organize, how to use their time wisely. If they want alone time, that's going to happen. Retrospectives. This is an easy fix. If you're a Scrum Master, change them. Change them every retrospective. This was one of the biggest aha moments for me. Every retro, do it differently. Why? Because if you keep doing the same one over and over again, you think it works, possibly it does. But again, it only may be illuminating those who speak or those who are comfortable in that particular setting. By changing it each and every time, you keep people on their toes a little bit more. You're going to start to see different people speak, different topics become illuminated, different voices will be heard. And get to know one another. You know, back in the days when we used to only be in the office, what did we do? We would go to a meeting. Hey, you want to get a cup of coffee? Yeah, let's do that. We walk together, chat. We're humans. That's how introverts and extroverts break the ice. We get to know one another. That makes us more comfortable. Then I'll speak more because you know who I am. In our virtual worlds, which many of us exist in, that doesn't happen so much. So what can you do differently about that? Can you change that? Can you make space for time like this to build the rapport, to build the human connections that we need? And if you're a Scrum Master, think about this. Actually meet with your teams individually, as individuals, one-on-one. Get to know them. Understand what those individuals are like. What makes them tick? What are their concerns? There's some physical changes we can do, some hard changes, I call them. Introduce quiet spaces, quiet time. There's this thing called focus time. Build it into your calendar. Quiet time in the middle of the day. Enforce it, protect it like there's no tomorrow. In a physical environment, quiet spaces are a very important thing. You know, the open floor plans are awesome, but you also need to balance them out with some quiet spaces. In New York, where I coach, often companies will employ or build these little, almost phone booth-size spaces where you can just go in there, close the curtain, and disappear. And that's a really good thing. Headphones. This is just a simple idea. Noise-canceling headphones. Give them to your whole team if you're in an open space. If they want to use them, great. A noise-canceling headphone can just make you disappear into your own mind. That's important for some. And for the very small investment, probably less than it costs you to come to this conference, you can probably outfit your entire team with them. Mood lighting. This is my favorite one. I have mood lighting everywhere. different kinds of lighting will actually generate different creative ideas and different types of energy. So think about that. What could you do differently? And now, standing where I am right now, it seems obvious to me that the dynamic of introverts and extroverts actually may affect Agile adoption. And even though it's obvious to me right now, in all of the years of coaching, this topic has never one time come up. So my long story, which got me right where I am right now, is a story of awareness. It's a story of my own awareness, and I hope it's also going to become a story of awareness for you too. It's also a story of kindness, empathy, open-mindedness. Those things are important. Having this newfound awareness for myself changed my perspective, and I hope it does for you what it has done for me. It helped me to look at things a little bit differently. And maybe you can draw your own conclusions and how you can improve your culture and your organization. And as I look back and I think about my own evolution as a coach, I remind myself that I can always do better. I can be a little bit more caring. I can be a little bit more open-minded. We all look at the world differently. And regardless of your personality type or where you come from, we all kind of want the same thing, for things to get better. And if you're in the leadership role, try doing something called a Gemba walk. Walk the team, walk the floor, be there, observe them. Try to look at their world as a bunch of introverts and extroverts and ambiverts and see if that changes your perspective. Thank you.